Kenya hopes to close a major provisional trade agreement with the European Union next month to ensure exports continue to access Europe on a duty and quota-free basis, with the EU and the Kenyan government announcing that they would resume talks on the deal known as the Interim EU Economic Partnership Agreement this week before its conclusion in March. They are both optimistic. EU Ambassador to Kenya, Henriette Giga, expressed hope that these negotiations will be completed when President William Ruto travels to the EU next month. The interim agreement is expected to be a placeholder for the Economic Partnership Agreement between the EU and the East African Community countries, of which Kenya is member. So joining me from Nairobi, Kenya is Africa Geo-economist and, of course, a macro analyst and CEO of Reach Management. His name is Lekan Satchu, and he will be talking to us this morning to look at how Kenya can benefit from this trade pact that it is hoping to sign with the EU. Thank you so much, Lekan, for joining us.
It's a pleasure to be with you. Thank you.
Now, looking at these particular trade agreement discussions going on between Kenya and the European Union, is it a new kind of agreement that they're hoping to pen paper to, or you would say that it's a carryover from talks from the previous administration?
These are carryover talks to reinstitute the trade environment and architecture that existed beforehand. There have been some complexities because Kenya is a middle-income country and therefore was being treated differently to some of the other East African community countries, and that was causing a ratification problem from those countries. And I think Kenya, because of the amount, the volume of exports that go into the European market, has basically played a lone hand and sought to accelerate the agreement between Kenya itself and the European Union.
But many are actually bothered about if Kenya can pull this off because of its economic status, just as you have said. But some people are actually happy because they feel or believe that this will bring about foreign direct inflows and, of course, forex inflows into the EAC and member states. But then I'd like to know, can this actually bring about some sort of immediate effect on the various legal tenders of these EAC countries?
So I think this architecture allows and facilitates FDI and investments from Europe into Kenya and the wider region. The European Union is a very large investor in Kenya. You can think of the French businesses like Total, Lafarge, the German investments here as well. So it's important to have the appropriate structure around this engagement. And of course, whilst Kenya is negotiating on its own, there is a spillover effect because Kenya is the regional hub. Investments coming into Kenya are also looking regionally within the East African community. Is it an immediate catalyst for FDI? I don't think so. But it is conducive to the flow of FDI into Kenya and East Africa.
All right, now let's look at the export potential of Kenya and the East African countries. What are the goods and services that you believe that these EAC member states have that can boost the foreign reserves, and of course scale up the economy both in the long and the short term?
So just to give you a flavor of what exports Kenya currently has going into the European Union, you have tea, you have flowers, which the European Union is an enormous market for Kenyan flowers. You have other perishables, fruits, vegetables, and the European market is a very big taker of these types of products. Coming the other way, we have machinery imports and higher value industrialization type products. With respect to the rest of East Africa, take Tanzania, that's a very big agricultural economy that, of course, would be useful for them to get tariff-free and quota-free access into Europe. You have minerals as well within Uganda. You were leading with a story about Uganda earlier. Minerals and both in Uganda and in Tanzania. So, you know, there is a potential here to really scale up this trade engagement between the European continent and the East African community. And I think this is part of the effort to lubricate that particular relationship.
All right, we are going to go on a break right now, Lekan Satchu, and when we return, we'll take an excerpt from what President William Ruto said. He's quite optimistic about this deal. Then afterwards, I will get your opinion from that.
News Central TV, Africa's #1 storyteller, has come with the best of both worlds. With a combination of news app and live TV, we ensure that you keep track of the latest headlines, breaking news, and in-depth analysis from professional journalists from around the continent. Download the News Central TV app on Android and iOS and get started today. Don't forget to follow us on News Central's social media platforms. News Central, Africa first.
This is the 1.4 billion people. If you are looking for a market, I've just explained to you that the African ACFTA brings a market of 1.4 billion people. As an investor, if you are looking at the future, and the future is green growth, and green growth is in Africa, and the ingredients of driving that green growth is renewable energy. And renewable energy, we have 50 times in Africa. You should know where your future and the future of your business and investment should be going. I do not explain. I know you are intelligent people, and I'm sure that's why you are sitting in this room, because you know where the future is. And I want to welcome you to Kenya. We are going to provide the necessary leadership to make sure that we come to the table with solutions on climate change, with solutions on green growth.
And that is the president of Kenya, William Ruto, talking about the potential of AfCFTA and, of course, renewable energy, telling and wooing possible investors, saying that they can come to Africa and come to Kenya to benefit more if they're willing to put their money into it, because Africa has got the potential to drive that economic initiative. So I'm going to go back to our guest, Lekan Satchu, even as we continue with our discussion. You heard what William Ruto said there. So I'd like to know what your reaction is as regards the AfCFTA, that is the African Free Trade Agreement that is in place, and of course renewable energy, and what you think these particular variables will play, the roles they will play in driving the conversation around economic trade between Africa and EU, the West, and other continents of the world.
So I think, you know, with the African Free Trade Agreement, I think it's a uniquely positive step forward for the African continent. I think it's going to add about 12.5% CAGR onto Africa's GDP. I think it's going to accelerate the continent's economy. And I think it works because it consolidates, many disparate economies, 55 countries in all, into one. The challenge will be for us to speak with one voice when we're at the negotiating table and make sure that people understand our trade flows worldwide might only represent 2%, but they're going to significantly grow going forward. The challenge with the African Free Trade Agreement is going to be in the implementation. We have a lot of folks who will do very well out of the current situation. Many of them are financing political parties and occupy very powerful positions. And of course, governments earn significant revenues from customs and other taxes. So the question is, the devil is in the implementation. The idea is very good. We can all accept that, but the issue will be, how do we implement it? If we implement it well, which I sincerely hope we do, then I think, of course, it's a very bullish development for the continent. And I think President Ruto's kind of pitching Kenya as the entry point into the East African economy and further afield, and saying to investors, look, this is the big picture, and the entry point for you guys is here in East Africa. And I think he's right in that regard. With respect to renewable energy, of course, post the Ukraine war and all the issues around energy, front and center for the European continent is its energy security. And increasingly, we're seeing Europe turn towards renewables. And in this regard, Kenya is very well positioned for that European pivot. We have geothermal energy. We have a very big wind power at Lake Turkana. We've already embraced that new renewable future. And I think he's playing to that gallery. He understands the constituency he's speaking to, and he's playing to that, and that's good to see. I think what I'm pretty impressed with the new administration, and they've got challenges, not least of which is a $4 billion shortfall in my estimation, which they've still got to cover over the next 18 to 24 months. But what I'm seeing is this crowding in, the attempt to crowd in the European Union. The Americans are in town on a regular basis. The British are excited about Kenya's prospects. And I think what that speech is telling us is, President Ruto is seeking to be a catalyst for the crowding in effect and create positive momentum in this current scenario. And I don't think anyone can have any doubt about his intention. The last administration lost focus. They didn't have this sort of vision that he has. And around him, he's got a very capable crew of technocrats who I think understand how economies work in a fundamental way.
All right, let's look at this particular agreement called the Economic Partnership Agreement. Now, the current agreement that is going on between Kenya and the EU is said to be an interim agreement and a placeholder for the EAP, or the EPA rather. But I'd like to know if this particular ongoing agreement will be consolidated by the EPA, or by the time the EPA comes on board, it will be a whole new game altogether, if there will be different components, or if there's going to be some sort of harmonization between the current agreements going on and, of course, the Economic Partnership Agreement that is meant to be in place.
Look, I'm not a technical whiz kid on these trade agreements. They're fiendishly complicated, as you surely know, and there are many capable people who spend all their lives looking at these things. My impression is that this is in essence similar to what is coming, but it remains a placeholder, and I think there's going to be plenty of room to expand. But I think what this is essentially doing is making sure the existing exports out of Kenya are not affected, and there is a continuity. But beyond that, I think, you're going to be looking more deeply at things like FDI. You're going to be looking more deeply at things like funding, the potential for Europeans to bring capital to bear in this economy. So that's the way I would characterize the situation right now.
All right, let's do a bit of comparison between this trade agreement going on between EU and the EAC countries and the one that the UK recently put pen to paper with Nigeria, that is the Developing Countries Trading Scheme, where Nigeria is meant to benefit duty-free trade of about 9,200 products. Now, would you consider them similar, or there's a bit of deviation between these?
No, I think, the concept is very, very similar. I mean, the idea is to, I take you back to AGOA. AGOA is probably the big daddy of all these sorts of agreements. The idea is to facilitate and accelerate African exports on a tariff-free basis into these developed market economies. And I think, the nuances are, the differences are, the United Kingdom and Nigeria has a long relationship, a historical one. So you have a different kind of dynamic at the bottom of it. But fundamentally, these are all similar agreements providing tariff-free access into those developed market economies in order to stimulate trade. And on the other side, of course, it's not always all altruistic. These developed economies also want to export into our economies and also are looking with one, eye behind them at China and seeking to wrestle some of that business that China has got away from China as well.
So some economists are saying that these trade agreements between Kenya and EU is not all about exports from Kenya to the European countries. Of course, you mentioned cut flowers, coffee, tea, tobacco, fish, vegetables, and the likes that are exportable from Kenya to other European countries, which are, of course, the money spinner for Kenya. But then what kind of imports do you think Kenya will be gaining from Europe, coming from Europe down to Kenya and down to Africa? What are those exports, and how do you think that can bring about some sort of socio-economic transformation for Africa?
So, at the moment, the majority of imports coming in are high-value machinery, things like that, products which are with significant value addition. The concern African countries have at the moment is that Africa potentially can become a dumping ground for highly subsidized European products. You can imagine, the Europeans subsidize their farm economy to a great degree. And the concern is that, there is a potential for Europe to dump into Africa heavily subsidized goods, which then put our, for example, farmers out of business. This is a concern. But overall, I think, what we're looking for from Europe is machinery, is equipment that helps us add value to our commodities. At the moment, the majority of our exports are primary commodities. There is no reason why we cannot go up the value chain with European help in order to make our exports give them more value addition. Bear in mind, you were talking about the African Free Trade Agreement. Intra-African trade has a much higher value addition component than exports from Africa outside the continent. So we want to see that component grow. We want to tie it together with the free trade agreement, and I think we want the Europeans to work with us as partners to increase the value inherent in our economies. For the Europeans, also underpinning a lot of these issues is concerns that if our economies don't provide jobs for our people, they will have an immigration challenge. So they also have a security issue, which is back of mind for the European authorities.
All right, before I let you go, Lekan, earlier on you talked about, you raised concerns about Kenya's economic status. And according to reports, Kenya is actually rated high on the LDC, that is the least developed country status. And of course, it is said that its goods are said to be attracting higher taxes, which means that Kenya is sort of a shining light in that regards. Now, how do you think Kenya can sustain that momentum, and how do you think it would affect other least developed countries within that ecosystem?
So, I must admit the Ruto government has increased the taxation levels across this economy. And I don't think that's an optimal response to the current scenario for two reasons. One is the Laffer curve. We know that you can raise taxes so high, and then you reach a level where you don't collect as much as you think you will. People start tax avoidance and all kinds of things. So I understand the current situation we find ourselves in and the challenge for the government to raise revenue, but I think on balance, I would like to hear more language around how they're going to reduce taxes as soon as they can. Kenya is a very attractive destination for international investment. We have a free and open market. Okay, there's some challenges with the shilling at the moment, but overall, it's in our DNA that we believe people can bring money in, make investments, make a profit, and repatriate it out. And I think that holds us in very good stead in terms of the rest of the continent. And I think we need to promote that. So look, overall challenges, but I think we're striking the right notes and making the right moves.
Well, it's quite nice to know that Kenya has the potential to champion that economic conversation with the EU and the rest of the world. And I believe that your optimism can go along with what the president of Kenya is also expressing in terms of economic potential of the country, and the optimism that if investors can put their money in this economy, it can thrive and bring about growth for all. Thank you so much, Lekan Satchu, for joining this conversation. Appreciate that.